The first time Marion saw the cat, it was raining. Not a drizzle, but a cold, soaking kind of rain that made everything look grayer than it already was. She had just settled into her red porch chair with a lukewarm cup of tea when a streak of matted fur darted across her yard and hid beneath the bush by the bird bath. He was barely more than a shadow, thin, filthy, and trembling. Marion didn't speak, didn't move. She just set the teacup on the side table, stood, and walked slowly inside. When she returned, she held a chipped ceramic bowl filled with leftover roast chicken and some warm milk. She placed it at the edge of the porch and sat back down in her chair, the rain pattering against the old roof. The cat didn't come out right away. He waited. But by nightfall, the bowl was empty. Marion named him Whiskers. It took weeks. She didn't try to pet him, didn't coax him too hard. Just food, just presence, and silence. Slowly, Whiskers crept closer. Then one day, in the warmth of a spring sunbeam, he curled at her feet. From then on, he never truly left. Chapter 2. The Last Winter. Together. Whiskers was never one for laps or cuddles. But he was always there, on the windowsill, watching as Marion wrote letters in her careful script, in the kitchen doorway, observing every movement as she stirred her soup. At night, he'd curl in the crook of her legs, a quiet guardian through the long, dark hours. Marion, now in her 80s, had grown slower. Her hands stiffened in the mornings, her steps more careful, her breath shorter. But she still rose at dawn to feed Whiskers, still brushed his thickening fur each evening with a worn bristle comb. She talked to him then, in low tones, about the weather, about old memories, and sometimes about her fears. "You'll be all right, won't you?" she whispered once, her hand pausing at his neck. "If I go first?" Whiskers blinked slowly. His tail twitched, then settled again. That last winter was hard. Snow piled up around the porch steps. Marion's woodpile thinned faster than usual. One morning, the postman found her collapsed beside the hearth. She was still warm. Whiskers was lying beside her, unmoving, guarding. Chapter 3. The Funeral Service. The church was small and worn, but filled with people. Marion had been a teacher for decades. Former students, neighbors, even the grocer from down the road came to say goodbye. A framed photo stood by the altar, Marion in her garden, smiling, her red porch chair just visible behind her. But what everyone would remember was the cat. He arrived halfway through the service. No one knew how he got in, whether through a side door left ajar or by slipping past someone distracted. But there he was, soaked from the sleet outside, paws muddy, fur clinging to his thin frame. He walked straight down the center aisle, past the stairs and whispers, and leapt into the front pew. Then, in an impossible moment of silence, he leapt once more, right into the coffin. Gasps rippled through the room. But Whiskers didn't cause a stir. He simply curled into the crook of Marion's still arm and lay there as if this was where he belonged, and he wouldn't move. The funeral director approached, hands hesitating. "Let him be," someone whispered. And so he stayed, through the final hymn and into the gentle closing of the casket lid. Chapter 4. The Grave. Beneath the oak. They buried Marion beneath an old oak in the town cemetery, just as she had requested. The sky wept a fine mist, and a breeze tugged at the mourners' coats. The priest said a few words, and the coffin was lowered. People began to drift away, but Whiskers didn't move. He sat at the edge of the grave, his green eyes fixed on the earth now covering his beloved friend. For hours he remained, long after the groundskeepers finished their task, long after the last footsteps faded. Someone left a knitted scarf on the headstone, another left flowers, but it was Whiskers who would not leave. Every morning he was there. Neighbors began noticing. The cemetery caretaker said the cat appeared like clockwork, rain or shine, and sat for hours by the grave. Never meowing, never chasing birds, just sitting vigil in silence. But what came next was something no one expected. Chapter 5. The Garden That Grew. In early spring, When the frost still kissed the grass in the mornings, the first green shoots began to appear near Marion's grave. At first it seemed ordinary, a weed perhaps, but then more followed: crocuses, tiny wild violets and a small rosebush, though no one had planted it. Word spread. The caretaker, a gentleman named Ellis, swore he never put them there, but Whiskers remained nearby as the flowers grew, nestled beneath Marion's oak, his eyes always alert, his body still thin but proud. People began visiting more often, not just for Marion, but for the sight of the cat who grieved. Children brought smooth stones painted with tiny paw prints. One girl left a small dish of warm milk each week. A woman brought seeds from her own garden and whispered, "For Marion," before placing them at the base of the headstone. Whiskers seemed to bless them all with his presence. But then, one morning, he was gone. Chapter 6. Gone. And then, a letter. The town buzzed with quiet concern. The cat who had waited at the grave for nearly a year every single day was suddenly absent. The milk dish remained untouched. The stone path children laid for him sat undisturbed. Days passed, then a week, then two. People searched. A few left missing cat flyers around the neighborhood, though there were no photos recent enough to do him justice. Others whispered that maybe he'd followed Marion at last, that perhaps his vigil had come to its end. Then Ellis, the cemetery caretaker, found something unusual on his morning walk near the grave. A letter. It was tucked inside a small tin box, sealed and set against the headstone. Written in soft cursive, it read, "To whoever finds this, if you are reading this, I have taken Whiskers home with me. My name is Daniel. Marion was my teacher many years ago. She once gave me the only kindness I knew in a bad year of my life. When I heard of her passing, I visited quietly, often sitting near the back of the service. I noticed the cat. I watched him stay, through snow, wind and rain. I brought him food sometimes, though he never let me near, until last week. He followed me home, just sat on my porch and waited to be let in. He's here now, warm and safe. He sits in the window each day, watching the road. I promised to love him as she did, and signed Daniel Whitaker." Chapter 7. A place called Home Whiskers now lived in a modest house with wide windows and a sunlit rug that stretched across the floor like a golden path. He didn't roam much anymore. His exploring days had quieted into the comfort of knowing he belonged. Daniel was a quiet man, gentle in movement, with an old leather chair where he read in the evenings. Sometimes he spoke aloud to Whiskers. Sometimes he simply sat in silence, letting the cat curl beside him. He hung a photograph on the wall, Marion in her garden, red chair behind her, sunlight in her hair. And every Sunday, without fail, Daniel and Whiskers walked, he with slow steps and the cat in a little carrier with the flap unzipped, to the cemetery. Daniel sat beside Marion's grave. Whiskers would emerge, stretch, and sit, not to grieve anymore, but to keep her company. And beneath the oak, where petals now danced with the breeze, it felt as though love still lingered, quiet,